When I first made the brilliant and stunning career move to voluntarily choose to walk away from a good DC area law school on a good scholarship in order to pursue graduate education in philosophy, do you want to know what one of the most common questions I would be asked by people in my life at the time? I'll give you a hint. No, it wasn't, "Well, what are you going to do with a master's degree in philosophy?" Sure, that was up there. It was a common enough question, but far more of a distant second place, nowhere near the number one most common question I would get asked. Rather, the most common question people would ask me was instead, philosophy? What's that? I have no idea. I always found this question to be an interesting, albeit rather tragic and unfortunate consequence of the failures of our public education system, and to somewhat of a lesser degree, even many higher educational institutions. Public school systems rarely include some kind of a basic, high school level introductory class to philosophy the way they do for all of the sciences and math and even certain other more well known humanities fields like history and English. And even many state universities and community colleges, well, usually at least having some kind of philosophy department and offering some kind of college level philosophy classes, nonetheless only ever treat philosophy as a voluntary elective that is in no way a requirement for graduation, thus meaning that even many people with college degrees, so long as they simply never chose to major or minor in philosophy, have never actually taken a single philosophy class in their entire lives or had any formal exposure to it in the classroom. I have a hard time imagining someone saying something similar for another field, like chemistry, what's that? I have no idea. History, what's that? I have no idea. Psychology, what's that? I have no idea. I just can't really imagine somebody, ever asking something like that or reacting like that to various other academic disciplines. Yet, for philosophy, the single most wide reaching, universally applicable discipline of them all, many people truly have no idea what it even is, let alone why it is so important and relevant to all of our day to day lives. Ameliorating such misconceptions and educational failures about philosophy is one of the primary goals of my channel. So, I thought putting together a more YouTube friendly formatted video answering this exact question that I've already been asked so many times in my personal life, what is philosophy? And the, I think, kind of necessarily implied interrelated question of why it is so important might make for a good first upload to YouTube as distinct from my live streams. Now, to give perhaps some consideration to this question of what is philosophy, and to be entirely fair in doing so, philosophy is a notoriously difficult field to define, precisely because of just how broad reaching and universally relevant and applicable it is. That being said, I personally tend to settle on the relatively short answer that philosophy is, at its core, simply the study of all first order questions or first order issues. Now, first order questions or issues is somewhat of a term I am coming up with myself here in its application, and obviously one can't really understand my answer to the question of what philosophy is without first understanding what it is I mean by a first order question or first order issue. Now, interestingly, that right there, what I just said, is itself an example of a first order question. So you see, ultimately, first order questions are broader scope, more fundamental questions which exist prior to subsequent, more specific issues. In other words, a first order question or issue is an issue that must be engaged with and a question that must be answered before one can go on to answer further questions built upon those prior answers. That may sound a little complicated, but allow me to give you an example borrowed from a fairly famous and big name ancient Greek philosopher who you have likely heard of before, by the name of Aristotle. In Aristotle's Metaphysics, Aristotle goes on to define metaphysics, that which he regards as a most fundamental branch of philosophy, and by extension, even philosophy itself, as the first science coming before all others. Thus, if the sciences are investigations into the study of certain categories of things, the first science of philosophy would be that science which must be engaged with and studied before moving on to investigate anything further beyond it. The first order question or issue of science and knowledge itself. And this first science of philosophy, as Aristotle conceives of it, is ultimately the science of what he calls in Greek to on heion, or in English, being qua being. Now, I say English, but qua is really just a fancy Latin word that means something along the lines of as such. So being qua being means more properly here being as such, or being insofar as it is being, or perhaps even more simply, and this will probably make it a little less confusing for you to just think of it simply as being itself. Thus, the first science of philosophy to Aristotle is the study of being or existence in of itself. This is a crucial distinction from the other sciences, all of which themselves investigate the nature of different categories of things in being, that is, different groups of things in existence. For example, chemistry is the study of matter. Biology is the even more specific study of living matter or living organisms. Astronomy is the study of the different stars in the sky. Geology is the study of the earth beneath our feet. And so on and so forth. All of the many sciences only ever investigate the nature of relatively narrow scope fields of different kinds of things in existence, under the assumption that there is an existence and things within that existence to investigate in the first place. However, the first science of philosophy, by contrast, according to Aristotle, is the only discipline wherein one explicitly engages with the first order question of investigating existence itself, rather than any more specific group of things in existence. Thus, whereas the scientist studies different categories of things in being, only the philosopher studies and explicitly engages with being or existence in of itself, rather than any category of things in existence. The study of being itself represents, therefore, a first order question, or first order issue, that is more fundamental than, and comes prior to, any scientific investigation into different categories of things, as one cannot provide an account of things in existence without first providing an account of existence itself. Even going beyond Aristotle's emphasis on the primacy of being, there are, in fact, a myriad of first order questions that must first be accounted for prior to engaging in any sort of more scientific methodological inquiry into the external world. In fact, the scientific method and the investigations of modern science all heavily presuppose a wide variety of conclusions that must first be themselves true in order for scientific investigation into the external world to even be valid and coherent in the first place. These assumptions and related issues include but are not limited to the aforementioned assumption that an external world exists in the first place, or even more simply, that existence itself exists, that truth exists and can be known to the human mind, that our sense experiences are giving us accurate and reliable information about an external world that in fact exists, and that we're not simply some brain in a vat plugged into the matrix somewhere, that the logical and mathematical principles we use to reason about and infer truth themselves exist as purely abstract and universalizable objects, or in other words, that logic and math exist and are valid, that knowledge is possible, that is, truth is capable of being known with justification. In fact, the scientific method even includes certain inevitable assumptions about value, that it is better to believe a true belief than a false belief, that it is better to believe something that is backed by empirical evidence and reason rather than something that is not, that one should believe true things over false things, and that one should seek out and favor knowledge of the external world over ignorance. These are just some of the many, long list of assumptions that must be made prior to engaging in the scientific method. as without any of these prior beliefs, or various others related to them, one could not even begin to engage in the scientific method in the first place, or validly seek out knowledge about categories of things in existence. This is precisely what makes them first order questions and issues, and why I favor using such language to refer to them in the first place. They are all the most fundamental questions about existence and our role in it as rational beings that must be engaged with first, before we can begin to even ask, let alone meaningfully answer, the many more specific questions which come after them. And it is this which, therefore, truly defines the role of the philosopher more than anything else, the thinker who does not simply assume and presuppose such things in pursuit of more secondary questions, in the way of a scientist, or a mathematician, or some other more specialized scholar, but instead seeks to engage with and provide an account for these first order questions directly and before anything else. This is also precisely what makes philosophy so important and so directly relevant to not just all other areas of scholarship, but even all areas of our day to day lives. It is only philosophy which explicitly engages with such first order questions, and therefore it is only philosophy which makes all other areas of human knowledge and inquiry, including all of the sciences, mathematics, and humanities fields, possible. But also, in much the same way, it is only philosophy which can, therefore, make the struggle of human existence itself intelligible and meaningful, as all of the questions which loom most pressingly over our day to day experiences. Questions like, why even get out of bed in the morning? What is the meaning of life? What kind of person should I be? What is good? What is bad? What is existence? What is knowledge and how do I acquire it? Should I even acquire it? These are all themselves first order questions of the human experience that must be engaged with before we can engage with anything else in our lives or make decisions about more specific details concerning our lives. Just like in all other areas of scholarship, only philosophy can make possible all other areas of our day to day lives. And this is precisely why everybody adheres to some kind of a philosophical understanding of the world, even if not fully self aware of it. Some kind of a complex, interconnected series of beliefs forming the worldview through which one's life and all of its experiences are interacted with. Philosophy, therefore, is in this regard the ultimate interdisciplinary study, with the greatest, most universally applicable relevance to all things. This leads to another somewhat famous definition of philosophy, and one of my personal favorites, by a contemporary thinker named Wilfrid Sellars. In Philosophy and the Scientific Image of Man, Sellars defines philosophy as the understanding of how, quote, things, in the broadest possible sense of the term things, hang together. In the broadest possible sense of the term, hang together. I rather like this definition, as it gets at the fundamental, unavoidable, and universally relevant, broad scope nature of philosophy, the first science Aristotle spoke of, which looks at any issue, any area of study, any question about the world, while taking the largest step back possible to appreciate the issue from the broadest scope possible, in order to identify, engage with, and provide an account for the most important, first order questions and issues at hand, so that one might then be justified to engage with, explore, and discover all other questions and answers that come after. So, what the hell even is philosophy? Well, the original Greek, from where we get the term, arises out of the Greek words philo, meaning love, and sophia, meaning wisdom. Thus, philosophy is most literally the love of wisdom, and a philosopher a lover of wisdom. But of course, there is a reason why I didn't simply just lead with this dictionary definition at the start of the video, as I don't believe the love of wisdom really answers the question people are asking when they say, what is philosophy? It's an overly simplistic definition that doesn't have meaning without first establishing what terms like wisdom or even love really mean. So, to answer that question, then, what is philosophy? What I think it really means to pursue the love of wisdom, to study and appreciate philosophy. My answer is ultimately grounded in the nature of philosophy as the most fundamental discipline of all. To be a lover of wisdom is, above anything else, to be one who appreciates and seeks out the most important first order questions defining existence and the human experience of it, and goes straight for the jugular, so to speak, in one's pursuit of knowledge. One who does not settle for mere scientific data sheets describing particular details about narrow focused, specific categories of things in existence, but rather one who instead seeks to get to the heart of what existence is in of itself, and of who we are and how we relate to that existence. A philosopher, a lover of wisdom, is he who engages with the most important, the most universally relevant questions underlying the foundation of everything. Thus, let that be my answer to the many people always asking, philosophy? What even is that? And why is it so important anyway?